Have you ever been the one in your family who always plays by the rules? While everyone else cheats to win, I was that person. Until I realized the only way to beat them was to stop playing their game and start owning it. This is how I did it. My name is Eleanor Vance. And tonight, in a grand ballroom filled with the most powerful people in Boston, I turned my uncle's coronation into a public execution. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and self-congratulation. My uncle, Theodore Vance, sat at the head table, basking in the applause from the city's elite. This was supposed to be his victory lap the night he officially seized control of my grandfather's billion-dollar philanthropic foundation. After a glowing speech about his new vision, he graciously invited me, his supposedly defeated niece, to the stage for a few words. He expected a tearful, graceful concession. He was wrong. I walked to the podium, the microphone cool against my trembling hands. I looked past the sea of glittering diamonds and tuxedos and locked eyes directly with my uncle, his wife Cynthia, and my cousin Isabel in the front row. The smile on Theodore's face was one of triumphant pity. "Thank you, Theodore," I began, my voice ringing out clear and steady through the enormous room. "My uncle believes this evening is his coronation. He's mistaken." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "This is not a party. This is an emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees, and my grandfather's legacy is not for sale." The silence that followed was absolute. This is one of those calculated family revenge stories born not from passion, but from a promise. It's about a war for a dynasty, fought not with shouting, but with secrets. Have you ever been completely underestimated by your own family? Seen as too soft or too naive to fight back? If you've ever had to show them the steel beneath the surface, just type the city you're watching from in the comments. Let's see how far this story of hidden strength reaches. To understand how I got to this podium, you need to understand the warning I received from a dying man, my grandfather. It all began 6 months ago, in the quiet, sunlit bedroom of my grandfather, Samuel Vance, overlooking the Charles River in Boston. He had been a lion of a man, a self-made philanthropist who spent the second half of his life giving away the fortune he'd made in the first. But at 88 years old, his body was failing him. I spent every afternoon of that final spring by his side, reading him the news and listening to his stories. On his last truly lucid day, he gripped my hand, his knuckles frail but his eyes still burning with a familiar intensity. "The foundation, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice raspy. "It's my soul. It's for you. You have the heart for it. The vision." Tears streamed down my face, but he squeezed my hand, demanding my attention. "But you must be careful of your uncle," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "Theodore is my brother's son, and I love him, but his heart is easily distracted by shiny things. A wolf does not always howl, Eleanor. Sometimes it wears a suit and smiles at family dinners." The warning was so cryptic, so out of character. It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my grief. He passed away 2 days later, at the will reading. His wishes were confirmed. I, Eleanor Vance, was to be the new chairwoman of the Vance Foundation. But there was a last-minute amendment, establishing a transitional board for the first year. My uncle Theodore would serve as co-chair, to guide me. His wife, Cynthia, and my cousin, Isabel, would also be given seats. It felt wrong, a direct contradiction of his warning. But in the fog of my grief, I accepted it as a final wish for family unity. I didn't realize it was the opening move in a silent, bloodless coup. We all have that one person in our family who just gets us, who sees our potential when others only see our flaws. If you've ever had that one person who is your champion, your believer in chief, just type the word champion in the comments below. Let's take a moment to honor the people who truly see us. My grandfather saw me. He also saw the wolf at the door. I just wasn't ready to believe it yet. My uncle's coup didn't begin with a declaration of war. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. A velvet coup fought in the hushed conversations at Boston's most exclusive country clubs and charity luncheons. In our first few board meetings, Theodore was the picture of a supportive mentor. Eleanor has her grandfather's passion. Of course, he would say to the other trustees, his tone oozing with concern. But the financial landscape is quite treacherous. Perhaps I should take the lead on managing the endowment portfolio. Just for a while, to ensure Samuel's legacy is protected. It sounded like wisdom. It felt like he was slowly prying my grandfather's keys from my hand. The attacks came from all sides, always disguised as care. My Aunt Cynthia, a woman whose primary talent is assassinating reputations over tea and scones, began her campaign. She'd host lunches for the wives of the other board members, sighing dramatically about how overwhelmed I seemed, how my focus on small, rather grim charities was admirable but lacked the grand, photogenic vision the Vance name required. Meanwhile, my cousin Isabel, a social media influencer whose charity work consisted of posting selfies at galas, started a whisper campaign that my ideas for the foundation were stale and depressing. They were systematically building a narrative that I, Eleanor, was a sweet, naive girl who was in over her head. In every meeting, my proposals to fund a new pediatric research grant or a clean water initiative were gently tabled in favor of Theodore's suggestions to sponsor a new wing at the Museum of Fine Arts or to underwrite the Boston Symphony's opening night. They weren't just disagreeing with my priorities. They were trying to transform my grandfather's engine for social change into a private slush fund for their own social climbing. They were suffocating his legacy with velvet gloves, isolating me, and priming the board for the moment. They would suggest I step aside for my own good. I was alone, and I knew their next move would be far more direct. Their main assault came on the night of the Vance Foundation's annual gala. This is the crown jewel of the Boston charity season, an event that historically raises millions for our causes. As the new chairwoman, this was my one opportunity to prove my competence to the board and the city. I had spent 6 months meticulously planning every single detail. It was supposed to be a testament to my grandfather's vision. Instead, it was a public execution of my credibility. It was a slow-motion catastrophe. The 5-course dinner I had confirmed with the caterer was mysteriously replaced at the last minute with trays of cheap, lukewarm appetizers. Our keynote speaker, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist whose research we funded, canceled an hour before, citing a sudden family emergency. An emergency I would later learn my Aunt Cynthia had fabricated with a cleverly disguised phone call. The carefully curated guest list of Boston's most generous philanthropists was somehow lost, and in their place, a flood of my cousin Isabel's influencer friends arrived, turning a prestigious fundraising event into a chaotic photo op for their social media feeds. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, paralyzed, watching my 6 months of work implode around me. Donors were leaving. The atmosphere was a joke. And across the room, I saw my Uncle Theodore, shaking his head with a look of perfect, practiced sorrow, whispering to a major board member about my unfortunate inexperience. He had set my house on fire and was now positioning himself as the only one with the water to put it out. It was a complete and utter humiliation. Have you ever been put in a situation where you were completely set up to fail? That sinking, helpless feeling when you realize the game was rigged against you from the very start. If you know exactly what that's like, just type the word "set up" in the comments below. Let's acknowledge those impossible moments together. As I slipped out a side door, unable to bear the whispers and pitiful glances any longer, I felt a crushing sense of defeat. They had won, or so I thought. I was hiding in a small, unused library off the main ballroom, my face buried in my hands, trying to block out the sounds of the disaster unfolding outside. My phone was a relentless barrage of pitying texts and notifications of Isabel's gloating social media posts. I felt small, humiliated, and utterly alone. I was ready to resign, to disappear, to give them exactly what they wanted. That's when the library door creaked open. It wasn't a guest. It was Arthur Finch, my grandfather's lawyer for over 40 years, a man whose quiet integrity was legendary. He walked over, his expression not of pity, but of grim understanding. "I was afraid this would happen. Eleanor," he said, his voice a low comfort. Samuel was, too. He placed a small, polished mahogany box on the table beside me. He left this in my care, Arthur explained, with very specific, and rather theatrical, instructions. I was only to deliver it to you personally on this night if the gala was, in his exact words, an unmitigated disaster orchestrated by wolves in designer clothing. He said you would need it most when you felt you had nothing left to lose. My head snapped up, the fog of my despair pierced by a jolt of adrenaline. My grandfather knew. He had anticipated their betrayal. With trembling hands, I opened the box. It didn't contain a check or a legal document. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a single, ornate brass key and a small, heavy cream-colored card. On the card, written in my grandfather's distinctive, élégant script, was not a letter of comfort, but a riddle. It said, "Where my first dollar met my final word. A locked story waits to be heard." It made no sense at all, but it was a message, a mission, a lifeline thrown to me from beyond the grave. My uncle thought he had won the battle tonight. He had no idea my grandfather had already laid out the strategy for the entire war, and he had just handed me the first clue. I left the gala through a service exit, the polished mahogany box clutched in my hand like a prayer. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the laboratory of the one person I knew I could trust without question. Dr. Ben Carter. Ben's cutting-edge pediatric cancer research was the first major grant I had championed at the foundation, and it was a project my Uncle Theodore had openly mocked as a sentimental money pit. Ben had as much skin in this game as I did. I laid the key and the cryptic riddle on his sterile lab bench. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune. I told him, my voice gaining strength. He left me a scavenger hunt. We spent the next 2 hours fueled by stale coffee, deconstructing the riddle. Where my first dollar met my final word. His final word has to mean his legacy, his books, his wisdom, Ben reasoned, pacing the lab. And his first dollar, I said, a distant memory suddenly sparking to life. He always told me the first dollar he ever framed was from his very first job, restoring historical documents in a tiny workshop on Beacon Hill. The pieces instantly clicked into place. Years ago, my grandfather had donated that entire original building to the Boston Public Library to create the Samuel Vance Center for American Enterprise. His first dollar and his final word, business and books, were under the same roof. It was well past midnight when we arrived. The grand library was dark and silent, but the ornate brass key wasn't for the main entrance. It was for a small, unmarked service door in a back alley, a door I recognized from my childhood. The key turned smoothly in the lock. We stepped inside, not into the public archive, but into a private, preserved space. My grandfather's original, wood-paneled office. The air smelled of old leather and paper. It was a time capsule, left untouched for decades. And on his immense oak desk, illuminated by the single desk lamp we switched on, sat a heavy, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't a will. It was something far more dangerous. The heavy, leather-bound book sitting on the desk wasn't a simple ledger. The gold-leaf title embossed on its spine read simply, "The Founder's Playbook." With a sense of reverence, Ben and I opened it. For the next 3 hours, under the solitary glow of the desk lamp, we turned the pages in stunned silence. My grandfather hadn't just left us a hint. He had left a meticulously detailed roadmap for a corporate coup. It was a masterclass in strategy, divided into 3 parts. The first section, titled Known Liabilities, was a damning, chronological record of every questionable financial decision my Uncle Theodore had ever been involved with. Every time he had used the Foundation's private jet for a business trip that coincided with a golf tournament in Pebble Beach. Every risky investment he'd championed that had quietly lost millions. Every time he had blurred the lines between the Foundation's mission and his own personal enrichment, it was all there, documented with copies of internal memos and account statements. The second section was a psychological profile, a brutally honest assessment of my uncle's weaknesses, his towering ego, his crippling insecurity, and his desperate need for social validation. The final section, titled The Bylaw Gambit, was the weapon itself. My grandfather had highlighted a little-known, archaic clause in the Foundation's original charter, a founder's prerogative clause. It stated that a direct descendant could call for an immediate vote of no confidence and assume sole control if they could present the board with irrefutable proof of gross fiscal mismanagement. The playbook laid out, step by step, exactly how to do it. He didn't just give me the ammunition, he taught me exactly where to aim. Have you ever had a moment of pure clarity? When the solution to an impossible problem suddenly appears right in front of you. If you've ever felt like you were finally handed the secret playbook to your own life, I just want you to type playbook in the comments. In that dusty, silent office, the despair I'd felt at the gala evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I wasn't the victim in this story anymore. I was the executor of my grandfather's final heeple. Brilliant plan. The founder's playbook was explicit. A direct, immediate attack would be messy. My uncle would frame it as a family squabble, a battle of wills. The cleaner, more devastating victory was to let his own ego become the instrument of his downfall. So, the morning after the disastrous gala, I didn't come out swinging. He surrendered. I sent a formal, carefully worded email to the entire board of trustees. I apologized profusely for the gala's organizational shortcomings, citing my own inexperience. I announced that, for the good of the foundation, I would be taking a step back from day-to-day leadership to learn and observe under my Uncle Theodore's more seasoned guidance. It was the most difficult, most humiliating email I have ever written, and it worked perfectly. My uncle was ecstatic. He saw it as a complete and total victory. He immediately seized control, scheduling a press conference to announce a grand reimagining gala to relaunch the foundation under his new, modern vision. He paraded his newfound authority all over the Boston Society pages, painting himself as the steady hand saving the family legacy from his well-intentioned but hopelessly naive niece. He was so blinded by his own hubris, he never saw the jaws of the trap closing around him. For the next 3 months, I played the part of the humbled student. I sat silently through board meetings, taking notes as he canceled 2 of my grandfather's long-standing research grants and redirected the funds to sponsor the new equestrian center at his country club. I watched as he commissioned a ludicrously expensive portrait of himself for the foundation's lobby. He was doing everything the playbook predicted he would, checking every single box on the list of what constituted gross fiscal mismanagement according to the bylaws. And every night, Ben and I would meet, secretly documenting each new violation, adding fresh, dated evidence to our dossier. He thought he was building his new kingdom. In reality, he was just building my case against him. Brick by gilded. Self-serving brick. The date for his grand gala was set. It was meant to be his coronation. I was going to make sure it was his trial. The week before my uncle's grand reimagining gala, the night he planned to unveil his new vision and unofficially crown himself the new king of Boston philanthropy, Ben and I initiated the final phase of the founder's playbook. The time for silent observation was over. It was time to prime the battlefield. We didn't launch a public, messy attack. We were surgical. From a secure, anonymous email address, I sent a single, devastating document to Elizabeth Hawthorne. She was the oldest and most respected member of the foundation's board. A sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been my grandfather's closest confidant for 30 years. The document was the internal memo where Theodore had officially canceled Dr. Doc Carter's pediatric cancer research grant. In the margins, in his own arrogant handwriting, was a note to his assistant. Redirect these funds to the Prescott Equestrian Center sponsorship. Better ROI for our public image. I didn't include any other context. I just gave her that one piece of the puzzle. Enough to plant a serious seed of doubt. Simultaneously, Ben contacted his most trusted old colleague, a tenacious investigative reporter at the Boston Globe. He didn't give her the whole story. He just gave her a different piece. The heavily inflated invoice and payment record for the $200,000 oil portrait my uncle had commissioned of himself, paid for by the foundation. He simply told her to be at the gala, where the portrait was scheduled to be unveiled, and that she might want to ask a few board members some pointed questions about it. We had now armed the board's moral compass and the city's most dogged reporter. There's a special kind of thrill in watching the intricate pieces of a long-term plan finally click into place. If you are on the edge of your seat, waiting for the truth to finally come out, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells me you're ready for the finale. And it tells the algorithm that these stories of justice deserve to be heard. The night of the gala arrived. My uncle walked into that ballroom believing he was the star of the show. He had no idea he was walking into a perfectly orchestrated ambush. The reimagining gala was even more grotesquely opulent than I had imagined. A string quartet played Vivaldi. Champagne flowed from ice sculptures carved in my uncle's likeness. And projected onto the ballroom walls were giant, smiling photos of Theodore himself. The main event was the grand unveiling of his $200 Zero Portrait. He took the stage to thunderous applause, thanking the fawning crowd for supporting his bold new vision for the Vance Foundation. He was at the absolute zenith of his triumph, basking in the spotlight he had so carefully orchestrated. Then, he made his fatal mistake. And now, he announced with a magnanimous, condescending smile, "I'd like to invite my dear niece, Eleanor, who is learning so much, to say a few words." He expected me to be the final prop in his play, the defeated girl graciously passing the torch. I walked toward the stage, my heart a steady drum against my ribs. I took the microphone from his hand. "Thank you, Uncle," I began, my voice clear and amplified, cutting through the polite applause. "You speak of a new chapter for this foundation." I agree. Which is why, under Article 7, Section 4 of the Foundation's original bylaws, I am exercising my right as a direct descendant of the founder to call an emergency session of the Board of Trustees. Effective immediately. A wave of shock silenced the room. My uncle's smile froze on his face. Before he could speak, I turned to the giant projection screen behind him. Let's begin with Agenda Item 1. The unilateral cancellation of the $1.5 million grant for Dr. Carter's pediatric cancer research. The damning memo I had sent to Elizabeth Hawthorne flashed on the screen, Theodore's handwriting clearly visible. This grant was canceled, I announced, so that funds could be redirected to sponsor the new equestrian center at my uncle's private country club. A series of gasps rippled through the audience. And Agenda Item 2. I continued, gesturing to the grand, velvet-draped portrait on stage. The matter of this painting, commissioned for $200,000. While my grandfather's key initiatives were being defunded, I nodded to the event staff. They pulled the cord. My uncle's smug, smiling face was unveiled to a room that was no longer applauding. My uncle stood on that stage, utterly exposed, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and sputtering rage. The ballroom was in chaos. The flash from the Boston Globe photographer's camera fired relentlessly, capturing his public disgrace. Before Theodore could form a coherent sentence, Elizabeth Hawthorne, the formidable matriarch of the board, rose from her seat. Her voice, amplified by a nearby microphone, cut through the noise like a judge's gavel. "I believe a motion is in order," she declared. "This is a private family matter." Theodore stammered, but his authority had vanished. No one was listening to him anymore. "I make a motion to invoke Article 7, Section 4 of the Foundation's bylaws," Elizabeth announced, her gaze sweeping across the other stunned trustees. "I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in Theodore Vance, Cynthia Vance, and Isabel Vance, and for their immediate and permanent removal from this board." Another trustee, a man who just an hour ago had been laughing at my uncle's jokes, stood up. I second the motion. Arthur Finch, my grandfather's lawyer, stepped onto the stage, acting as the official legal counsel. "The motion has been made and seconded. All trustees in favor." Hands shot up around the room. A forest of silent condemnation. "The motion carries," Arthur declared, his voice final. "They are removed. Effective immediately." But Elizabeth wasn't finished. I make a second motion, she said, turning to me, to install Eleanor Vance as the sole, undisputed chairwoman of the Vance Foundation, granting her all the rights and privileges thereof, as was her grandfather Samuel's original and true intent. The second was immediate. The vote, a formality, in the span of 5 minutes, in front of the entire Boston elite. I had won. My uncle, his face ashen, was quietly escorted from the stage by event security. A finale. Silent humiliation. I was left alone at the podium, the sole heir to my grandfather's kingdom, not by birthright, but by battle. I stood on that stage, in the ringing silence that followed my uncle's exit, and looked out at the hundreds of shocked faces. The party was over. The real work was just beginning. I took a deep breath and stepped back to the microphone. I sincerely apologize for the evening's interruption, I said, my voice resonating with a newfound authority. But as the new chairwoman, allow me to reintroduce you to the real Vance Foundation. My grandfather's foundation was never about sponsoring equestrian centers or funding vanity portraits. It was about funding pediatric cancer research. It was about creating clean water initiatives. It was about empowering communities. And under my leadership, starting tonight, it will be again. My uncle fought a bitter war for an inheritance. I fought this war for a legacy. And those two things are not the same. An inheritance is simply what you are given. A legacy is what you build, what you protect, and what you are willing to fight for. The final lesson from my grandfather's playbook, the one he spent his life teaching me, is that sometimes you must be willing to fight even against your own family to protect the values that truly define you. This long, painful family revenge story was never about destroying my uncle. It was about saving my grandfather's soul, his true purpose, from being corrupted by greed and ego. If this story about fighting for what truly matters resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe and join a community that believes in purpose over profit. The battle to honor a legacy is never easy, and it's one I want to continue sharing with you. For my last question tonight, tell me in the comments, what is one value, one single principle, that you are committed to protecting in your own life? Let's fill this space with things that are not for sale. Thank you for listening. True wealth, as my grandfather knew, is never about what you own. It's about what you refuse to lose.